Okay, so let's get into another little extra issue here. Pat, earlier this week, I had the fortune of meeting some Georgian opposition leaders who were actually quite pro-President Trump because of more lethal aid than under President Obama, but they want more from the president. They want the United States more engaged, more pushing against Russia. They want a presidential visit. What do you say to that idea?
I'm not against a presidential visit to Georgia, but I think the idea that the Georgians, I'll tell you what they're looking for. They're looking for admission to NATO. Yeah. They want eventually the United States to give them a war guarantee if they get into another war with the Russians like they did in 2008. And while we got goodwill with the Georgians, that is not in the national interest of the United States. A war guarantee in the Caucasus that far away from this country is something
well, in 2008, in the midst of the presidential campaign, John McCain was lobbying really for aid to Georgia, and a kind of a skirmish had established. There was some discussion that the Georgians actually kind of created the skirmish in hopes of getting American help. And at one point, John McCain said, "We're all Georgians now," but his argument that the administration should step in, and that would have been the Bush administration, the W. Bush administration, right? It fell on deaf ears, and nobody wanted to wade into those waters. But I think John McCain and the Leadership Institute that he has been established in his name are still advocating for help to these smaller, struggling democracies. And it's not something I think that Trump really is a fan of, and I think Democrats are nervous about as well.
And I think listeners probably are asking, why is the McLaughlin Group talking about Georgia this week? But
right.
The reason is, in terms of American foreign policy, we obsess about Syria and North Korea and Iran, but around the world, a lot of the art of diplomacy and statecraft, military relations is about these nations. What is the next step? Because the next step, even though it's not in the news at the moment, could lead to war or could lead to a peace. I mean, how do you see this, Tiana, this role of America in the world?
The issue is that 8 years of the Obama administration completely abdicating their role and putting pressure on the Russians, Russia rewarded us with an attempt to interfere in our elections. That is an attack on our democracy. So yes, it is in our interest then to make the Russians feel like we are in a position of authority. And this is one where President Trump actually does have the unique power of his online presence. I mean, this is someone Trump is not a businessman, he is a media star, and he's better at it than almost anyone in terms of branding. So this is something where it doesn't necessarily require billions of more dollars in aid, as much as it does, if Trump can call Kim Jong-un his good friend, and if Trump can bend the knee to Putin in Helsinki, why can't he show more support on social media
to our allies?
That's
a good point, Clarence.
I'll borrow Nancy Pelosi's phrase, all roads lead to Putin with President Trump. And I suspect for that reason, he's not going to want to come in on Georgia's side and push for them to join NATO. But I'm trying to figure out what President Trump's foreign policy is beyond that. One day he's an isolationist, the next day he isn't. He is very short-term in his thinking, and we're trying to be long-term now and thinking about the U.S. role in the world.
But,
as long as he's president, we have an isolationist period right now.
Right. But if you want to talk about America's role in the world, first of all, Georgia, they got two breakaway provinces that they reinvaded.
South Ossetia and Abkhazia.
Abkhazia reinvaded, and the Russians came in, threw the Georgians out, and sent them back where they came from. And look, we ought to have good relations with Georgia. But look, let's look at Russia. I know it's run by Vladimir Putin. It's one of the greatest powers on earth, the greatest military powers. It's moving toward China. Strategically, if you had Nixon here or Reagan here, they would say, why in heaven's name are we not communicating with him? It's not like
Or wouldn't they be making more trips to New Delhi?
I think
for heaven's sakes, New Delhi doesn't have nuclear weapons that can land on the United States.
No, it's an ally against China, the Sino-Russian.
Look, why would we want another country to fight for? For heaven's sakes, don't we have enough in NATO?
No, I'm saying they would fight for us, Pat.
Are you kidding?
No, look at the South. Look at the Indian Ocean with the Chinese transits through there.
You think the Indians are going to fight the Chinese on behalf of the United States?
No, on behalf of their own interests shared with us, for the same reasons that they're
shared. But the point is, look, we've got enough alliances to fight for enough countries around the world. You got Korea, you got Japan, you got the Philippines, you got 30 countries in NATO, for heaven's
I
sake.
say it's time for the president to wade in here with a tweet and just settle it all.
That's right.
Okay, well, so let's reframe the question here. If we are talking about, let's go around the panel here and talk about the biggest foreign policy success and the biggest foreign policy failure thus far. And in deference to my liberal panelists, if they would prefer, they can say 2 biggest failures. But Pat, why don't you start us off?
The biggest success is we haven't gotten into a major war since Donald Trump took office, despite the fact that a lot of people thought we would.
And what's the biggest failure?
Biggest failure in foreign policy, we haven't gotten out of the Middle East yet.
Okay, interesting. All right.
Well, I'm going to mention Baghdadi. We've
Okay.
not mentioned him once. This was the big success that the president declared, said it was equal to getting Osama bin Laden. Baghdadi is horrible, and he did globalize ISIS and a terrible human being. He wasn't behind 9/11, so the president's success vanished after like 24 hours. The biggest failure, I think, is what he has done in the Middle East and betraying the Kurds and pulling American influence out of Syria and the broader Middle East.
And before we go to Clarence on this, it is quite fascinating to see how under the Bush administration, 2007, 8, 6, 7, 8, Democrats were very much saying, get out of Iraq, do that. And now it's inverted with Democrats actually be saying you are acquiescing American strategic interest in that part. It's inverted. It's interesting. Our dynamic American politics never.
It was never
ceased.
clear, we talk about Barack Obama's policy in that region. Remember, his campaign got its first big boost off of his anti-Iraq war policy, which everybody felt was amazingly either brave or reckless at the time, proved to be prescient because after a while, all the other Democrats joined in that policy, and a lot of folks who weren't Democrats. But these days, though, with President Trump, I think his biggest failure is closer to home is Mexico. The border promises he's made. Our Central American policy is more chaotic than it was when he came in, and he hasn't been able to perform any miracles there. And we also find out that the wall was a campaign gimmick now. But anyway, there's with the Syrian region, that is a case again of his lack of a long-term policy. Even shortly after he said we're pulling out, suddenly it turns out we get Baghdadi, more or less in spite of Trump's policy than because of it. So it's been pretty reckless out there.
Diana.
If you had asked me this a few months ago, I would have said our handling of the Syria crisis and our demolition of ISIS is a global threat, but clearly that's not going to remain true. So I guess now I have to give credit, obviously, to the assassination of Baghdadi. In terms of failure, I would say everything that we've done with China and this trade war. The president has wisely pushed and changed the Overton window in terms of the discussion about China more than anyone else I can think of, and for the better. China is the worst human rights violator in the country, or on the planet. I mean, right now, but it's clear that they feel empowered. Their crimes against their own citizens have only gotten worse, and now they're allowed to make us look like fools with their equivocating on this trade deal. So if Trump was going to make Americans pay a price in order to enact justice globally, that's fine, but he never made the case to the American people and said he was looking at through some sort of mercantile economic system, that just absolute economic fantasy.
But that's a good point, but what do you look out for first? The vital national interests of the United States. I agree with you on how everybody's mishandled China horribly for the 15 years before Trump came in. But you look out for the national interest of the United States first and avoiding conflict, making deals like Nixon did with Mao, or do you concern yourself first with the human rights of the Uyghurs in Western China? Now, Nixon went to China when Mao Zedong was in the middle of the Great Cultural Revolution, and the whole country and all the liberals said, this is wonderful, it is great. He was the greatest mass murderer of all time at the peak of his power.
And I think Clarence is a Star Trek fan here. There's an old Vulcan proverb: "Only Nixon could go to China." Anyway, for my 2 cents, I would say that
Live
actually,
well and prosper, by the way.
yeah, thank you, sir, and you too. China, I would say, is the president's biggest success, at least in terms of the military and intelligence side. The Navy's position with the Chinese. I know Pat is very much keen to get into the South China Sea, but we would have lost a naval conflict, I think, with China had we not improved our military predisposition. And I also think, in the broader question of American-led international order, even though perhaps that's not what's motivating President Trump, being able to challenge the Chinese on things like Huawei, massive theft of intellectual property, their mercantilist feudal order where they're essentially trying to buy political power in countries, pushing back against that and showing the best tenets of America in terms of the rule of law with our trading practices.
Do you really believe that President Trump will go into re-election claiming big successes with China?
No, but
when the soybean farmers are struggling.
No, but I think the function, I mean, I think we need to resolve the trade war, but the function of the broader geopolitical thing, China is trying to displace the American-led international order. George Kennan!
Even Democrats are saying, Nixon was right to raise the China issue finally, when Republicans didn't under Bush and Democrats didn't under Clinton.
That's right. It's been interesting. They seem to know how to practice capitalism better than we do, except that it's state capitalism, but it has helped them to prosper. I like to think in the long run, this will be a victory for capitalism and for closer ties around the world. But China's doing a hell of a job of being a police state at the same time that they're a free enterprise country. As
a concluding thing, let's go around the panel here and think about what is going to be the biggest story, for good or ill, in foreign policy, the biggest country, if you want, in 2020. Pat?
In 2020, I think Mexico.
Okay, interesting. Eleanor?
Immigration, because it dovetails with domestic policy. I agree with that.
Good point. Tiana?
Seeing as two of the three frontrunners are, of the same foreign policy ilk as Trump, I think it's going to be Russia-Ukraine.
Okay. Clarence?
Interesting. I guarantee that whatever we say is going to be wrong a year from now. But I got to go with Mexico too, and Central America in general. It's right there at our doorstep, and it's already a problem that we're not dealing with straightforwardly enough.
I think it's going to be North Korea. I think sadly the peace talks are going to break down there, and I mean maybe they'll restart. But North Korea, I think, is going to start testing ICBMs again, and that puts us back into very difficult and dangerous territory. Hopefully I'm wrong about that. Anyway, thank you for listening in to us today.